This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and this is the hour where we go a little deeper, where we dig behind the headlines and bring you those stories that people are talking about. Well, I've been talking about my Battleground state tour. I have been away from California for the last week and a half, hitting the roads, going into the Battleground states, into popular cities, talking to voters. Kicked off in Phoenix, Arizona, went to Nevada, went to Las Vegas, Nevada. Last night was in the great state of Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. And today I'm broadcasting live from Detroit, Michigan. I will be out knocking doors in Detroit tomorrow and will be engaging with Michigan voters at a voter engagement event that's happening at a cafe owned by African Americans in the city of Detroit called In Harmony. If you haven't already registered to join me and local elected officials, community leaders, and activists, make sure you do so. Go to my website, arevamartin.com. You can sign up. This is a free event open to the public. We're going to have some spirited conversations about what's happening on the ground here in Michigan. And of course, like any Black event, there's going to be some great music, going to be some good food, and some complimentary drinks. So make sure you go to my page and register. We'd love to see you. In this hour, I'm going to be joined by Norman Clement. He is the founder of Detroit Change Initiative. This is a voter registration and engagement organization that he founded in his kitchen of his home in 2017. Also, Reverend Lennox Yearwood is with me. He's the president and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. He is a surrogate for the Harris Walls campaign. And Michael Imhotep is here. He's a historian, scholar, host of the African History Network. He is a Detroit activist. He's going to be joining me tomorrow night. I had an opportunity to join him on his radio show on Friday to talk about some of the issues that are motivating Michigan voters. So when we come forward, we're going to talk about young male voters, going to talk about Black male voters in general, and some of the issues that are driving the voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, that blue wall. Is there a chance the three blue wall states that have voted or elected led to the election of 2 Democratic presidents might not break for Kamala Harris in this election cycle? Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580. We are back, and I am broadcasting live from the great state of Michigan. I'm actually in Detroit, Michigan, for the 4th stop of my 7-state Battleground tour. I've been to Nevada, I've been to Arizona, Wisconsin, and now in the great state of Michigan. And joining me to talk about what's going on in Michigan, one of the critical battleground states that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz need in order to win this election. Reverend Lennox Yearwood is here. He's a surrogate for the campaign. He's the president and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. Michael Imhotep is here. He's a local meaning Detroit, radio personality, a scholar and a historian. And Norman Clement is here. He's also a local Detroit activist. He's a voter organizer, voter engagement. He's been on the ground in Michigan. Norman, let me start with you. What are you hearing from the voters that you're talking to?
Thank you for having me on the show. So far, we've been at every early polling location since Saturday. What we're hearing is voters are excited. They're out to vote. They're ready to vote. We also talked to Black men in extension since last year about their issues with politics and our policy. You have some, but we're not seeing that on the ground. We're seeing brothers, most of our brothers went into protection of Black women. They're supporting Black women. And you might have some nation of folks that are going out supporting Donald Trump. But also, when you hit them with facts, they're finding ways to say, well, what about this? What about this? You keep it within facts. At some point, just like the sister you had on your show, my hands are off. You know the facts. You know what's going on. You know what's at risk. You're deciding that because the issues are underlying issues outside of politics that you're voting against this woman. Just call it what it is. You're mad that the woman that you want didn't want you, so a vote for Donald Trump will be both vote against her. Let's keep it a buck. This is what we're hearing out here. This is what it is. When you come with truth, when you come with facts, they find other underlying reasons why not to support this woman. And in fact, that same notion did not come when you supported a white woman 2 years ago running for governor. And so we're seeing on so this notion of there's some underlying issues that are going on. At that same time, we are pushing out there to get out the vote. Our youth vote is tremendous right now. our first rally at the Pistons Land, we had over 800,000 people voted at the central clerk's office. Right now, absentee ballot in Detroit, out of 101,000 votes, over 65,000 votes ballots have been returned. That's just the mail. We're not talking about the drop boxes. Right. And today we were at Clark Park. We had an event there, getting out the vote, and it was steady. Steady people are happy about the early voting process. So I'm no longer looking at the polls. I'm no longer talking to brothers who are gone. I'm talking about folks who are on the ground, who do this work every single day on a daily basis, that people are coming out to vote. That's what we're talking to.
That is so encouraging, Norman, because you heard me ask, what happened to Black men looking out for Black women the way we've looked out for Black men throughout history? So Black men voting against their best interest and voting against the best interest of Black women is still very puzzling to me. I'm glad to hear you also say the youth vote is strong. Let me ask you, Reverend Yearwood, you are president, Hip Hop Caucus. Presumably you are out talking to a lot of young voters. What are you hearing from those young voters?
I mean, I think for many of these young voters, they realize the stakes. And for many of them, they are saying that issues of economic justice, issues of women's rights, issues of climate justice are clear for them. They're in a position now where they're saying if it's bad in 2024, where we're having wildfires, droughts, we're having Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, the weather in Phoenix, Arizona has tapped over 100 degrees. A lot of young folks are saying if it's bad now in 2024 and I'm 20, then when I'm 60, 40 years from now, what does this look like? And how can we have someone who wants to be president at this critical time, who actually is denying of the climate, denying of the issues of how we can build wealth in our communities, denying of the issues of creating this, just a spirit of just, I mean, this is a spirit of anger, a spirit of the other. I mean, and I think this generation wants to break through that. So they, I think more than anything, there's a group. I mean, you can teach racism, you can teach misogyny. I mean, obviously, so there are those who are doing that. But I think that there's an excitement, and there's an excitement for those who understand the stakes for their generation. And they're saying, honestly, that a lot of the older people won't be around. In essence,
well, older to them might be 25. So
you know what I mean? They're saying 50 years from now. I mean, 50 years from now, when they're in their 60s or their 70s, or they're 78. A lot of the people we talk about now won't be around, and so, but their policies will be, and they understand either you shape policy or policy shapes you. And so they're understanding that this is an election, not only for the present, but for the future.
And let me ask you, Michael, the vulgarity, the vile nature of how Donald Trump is now campaigning. I mean, he's been unhinged. We've seen it since he's been on the scene, but he's really, I mean, he's just letting loose. I mean, using profanity, using racial slurs, racial epithets, playing into racial stereotypes, talking smack about Detroit.
Yes.
Is any of this, I mean, people are hearing this, right? I don't think most folks want a president that uses that kind of language. There is this kind of strong man, machismo, prototype that's out there. And I guess that's why he's going on Joe Rogan, Donald Trump is, because he's trying to appeal to those, those bros, I guess. But do you see amongst your listeners and, the folks you're interacting with, that is resonating with voters?
Hey, Areva, it's good to see you. I just wrapped up with the AKAs here in Detroit. They had a forum dealing with Project 2025. So I had to race home to be on the air with you. So, for the majority of African Americans, that does not resonate with them. Donald Trump is desperate. There are a lot of people talking about a cognitive decline with Donald Trump. New York Times had an article comparing speeches from 2020 that he did when he was running to today, and to his speeches today. There's a lot more profanity today. There's a lot more darker images in his speeches today. Okay, so this is a grievance campaign for him, and he's trying to stay out of prison. The overwhelming majority of African Americans are against this type of language, against this type of talk. There is a smaller percentage of a small minority of African Americans who gravitate towards Donald Trump for one reason or another. One has to do with his stance on undocumented immigrants and pushing this lie that undocumented immigrants are taking our jobs. It's the same lie that was pushed in the 1930s during the Great Depression, when the U.S. deported up to 1.8 million Mexican Americans, and they said they were taking their jobs. Herbert Hoover said they were taking Americans' jobs, and after the fact, they found out that about 60% were born here legally. And when economists did the analysis, they found that those undocumented, well, the people who they deported were contributing to the economy, contributing to the GDP as well. So then you have a small percentage of African-American men, not the majority, but a small percentage of African-American men who buy into this misogyny. We have to be, so the first call that we had for a win with black men that Monday night, the day after, it was July 22nd, because July 21st, Joe Biden dropped out and he endorsed Kamala Harris. So then everything started going at hyper speed, right? That first call that we had for win with black men, we talked about that we're going to have to go out here and talk to these brothers, some of them, the small percentage, who will have some misogynist views. And we have to be honest that we're dealing with a white male patriarchal society that has projected this misogyny, and some African-American men have been indoctrinated with it to varying degrees, but that's not the majority of us. Okay. But there's an excitement on the ground. Obama was here today. We know, in Metro Detroit, Vice President Kamala Harris was here yesterday with Liz Cheney, former Representative Liz Cheney. There's a huge excitement. And now, October 19th, Saturday, October 19th, early voting started here in Michigan. So now we're transitioning from that excitement to actually voting. November 5th is not election day. That's the last day you can vote. In many states, you can vote now.
No, it's so important. There was a special last night that Anderson Cooper did on union workers in Michigan. And Norman, they had black members on from unions, and there was a black man who said that immigrants were taking jobs, and we know that's a talking point that Donald Trump likes to push. That's a narrative that he pushes, and other Republicans have been pushing that narrative. Have you heard that parroted back to you as you and your organization has been out on the ground in Michigan? Have you heard folks raise immigration and the role of immigration as it relates to black jobs and the economy?
Yeah, now we raise that issue. When we hear that, now we always go back. So what job are they taking? They're just taking jobs. So what job are they taking from you? We have to be real specific about what job are they taking. Yeah,
we were in Milwaukee. Kim Whitley, actress, comedian, yesterday, door knocking. We met two black guys, and he raised that point. And I live in California, so I said to him, "Do you want to go pick strawberries?" I said, "Do you know any black men? Do you have any friends that want to work on a farm picking lettuce and produce? Do you understand that the immigrants provide the labor that produces the groceries, the food, the fruits, the vegetables that we eat?" And he said to me, and both of us lying, "Oh yeah, I know some brothers that'll do that." Now and I know.
Nobody's picking strawberries.
I said, you gonna go in the hot sun, make about $10 an hour, if that, live in a shack the way immigrants live, and that's the job you're fighting. That's the job you telling me that you're fighting for. So we knew he wasn't being genuine. He was disingenuous. He had gotten backed into a corner because all of his so-called facts were debunked because they weren't facts to begin with. So I'm glad to hear that you're also asking folks when they say that, what is the job? Because we can define the jobs that immigrants have, and we know for the most part they're jobs that many Americans don't want.
Right, and the thing about that is you're dealing with something when they're backed in the corner they can't pronounce it. So there's an underlying issue of why they are mad at the system. They're mad at the system because guess what? They've been racially profiled. They thought this will happen. They thought that the new thing, all the promises they didn't get. So they're mad at something. So instead of going out there, doing the work, going in the community, finding the access to the jobs, actually going out there, going to organizations or programs that will help to get the jobs, they get frustrated, mad, and they want to blow everything up. And that is the weak-minded. That's what white supremacists do. That's a white supremacist mindset. Well, throw my hands up in the air, and I'm not going to do anything, and just be pout and get mad. And when it blows up, I'm going to be happy because I told them so, and it happened to me. I want to struggle for everybody else. We got to deal with that. We have to deal with that. We tell them all the time, and we combat that all the time with truth, fact, and documentation. If they don't want to hear that, say, hey, good luck to you, and we don't keep moving on. But understand this. I tell the guys all the time. It never ends well for fascism. It never ends well for fascism. Those that support it, those that sit on the sidelines. So understand, this is a moment. It'll be totally different if another candidate was running. It would totally different if it would be Mitt Romney, or totally different if it would be somebody else, that we could have a government after 4 years. We could still have our rights to protest. We could have our rights to peacefully assemble. We have our rights to live prosperly. When someone is coming in with 2025, telling you to take you back to all the way slavery, thinking about what will happen in that time. We think about it could be a brink of a civil war. We think about the things that happened over there in Afghanistan, over there in Lebanon, what's going on over there in Israel, what's going on in Gaza. This is a madman ready to take over. This is not the time to sit on the fence or be mad or upset. Understand this. It's about the greater good. And I tell my brothers, it's about the greater good. Put your ego to the side.
Hold that thought for me. I want to come back to that in terms of how you break through when you meet those kinds of individuals on the campaign trail or as you're out canvassing. I also want to talk about those uncommitted voters. We know in the primary, they played a big part here in Michigan. Where are those voters now? What are they going to do? They've got a decision to make because they're still not happy with the Biden-Harris administration. Many of them are not happy with the way the war in Gaza is going. When we come forward, more in KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us. Broadcasting live from Detroit, Michigan, one of the battleground states. The vice president, as well as Donald Trump, have been spending a lot of time in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Georgia. Those 7 battleground states have been inundated with the candidates and with their surrogates because we are just 14 days away from the most consequential election of our lifetime. And as Michael said appropriately, November 5th is not the day to vote. It is the last day to vote because over 17 million people have already cast their ballot across the country. We saw in Georgia on their first day of early voting, over 300,000 people stood in a line to vote early, which broke a record for that state. So people are energized, people are motivated, and 17 million, we don't know how those 17 million people have voted, but we do know there's a lot of excitement on the ground in these battleground states. I've witnessed it myself for Harris and Walz, but there are also some issues. We don't want to gloss over the fact that there are still a lot of voters who have not decided that even though Donald Trump has promised to be a tyrant, even though he has promised to do mass deportation on day one, there are still people who could be impacted by his negative policies that are going to vote for him. And we know in the last presidential election, he got 70 million plus votes. So I do want to talk some about what's happening in Michigan around those uncommitted voters, those protest voters, Michael, that we saw in the primary when Joe Biden was still the candidate. These are Americans who live in Detroit, but they're pro-Palestinian. Maybe some of them are Palestinian Americans, but they are unhappy. They believe that the Biden-Harris team, has been too soft on Benjamin Netanyahu, that they've not done enough to bring hostages home, to end the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Where are those voters now? And could those voters be the reason that Michigan doesn't break for Kamala Harris?
I sure hope those voters are not the reason why Michigan does not break for Kamala Harris, because Michigan is part of the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So I know you have had I've been watching local news stories, and you've had some of some Arab American groups who realize that they need to support Vice President Kamala Harris. Some haven't realized that, but you're seeing some starting to break for her, and because she's striking a different tone than Biden. Okay. And we talked about this last Friday when I interviewed you on the African History Network show, Areva. A sitting vice president is not going to put out policy, especially on foreign policy, that undermines a sitting president. Okay, there's only one president at a time. And so Vice President Kamala Harris, at the same time, talking about Israel has a right to defend itself, and Israel is an ally of America. But she also talks about the Palestinians deserve to live with have their humanity respected, deserve to live in peace, etc. However she phrased it. Okay, so now there's last night on MSNBC I saw Michael Moore, who's from Michigan, the documentarian Michael Moore, and he is involved in an initiative to get 40,000 voters out of Michigan who probably would not normally vote to vote for Kamala Harris, to make up for some of those uncommitted voters who may not vote for Kamala Harris or may vote for Jill Stein or something idiotic like that. Now, I have seen I've seen some focus groups where you've had some here in Michigan say they'll vote for Donald Trump, but they forgot Donald Trump instituted a Muslim ban, banning Muslims coming from countries from 7 states. That also, that whole tone increased anti-Muslim sentiment here in America. And Donald Trump has said that he will withdraw all humanitarian aid from Gaza, from Palestine. And he said he'll let Benjamin Netanyahu do whatever he wants to do. Okay. So yes, it will get worse. And a lot of them are not calculating that. They're just thinking they confuse activity with productivity and just say, oh, I don't like this person, so I'm not going to vote for them. But you're not looking at what the alternative is. And we have to look at this holistically. You have to look at what the alternative is.
Yeah, Norman, are you seeing that on the ground? I read an article about some of these voters, and some were angry at the leadership of some of these groups, because even though the leadership didn't endorse Kamala Harris, they felt like they made some words or said some statements that were too favorable. And one took the position that we should risk letting the Democrats lose, that would be a part of their strategy. And they said by doing that, by being that decisive, losing voting, being that block that causes the Democrats to lose, would put them in a position where the Democrats would have to come to them, and then they would get the demands that they want and be ready in 4 years to support the Democrats. Now, not saying it's logical, but that was the thinking of one of these Arab Americans in Michigan about why they should continue to hold out their vote and not vote for Kamala Harris. What are you hearing on the streets about this issue of these uncommitted voters?
I hear 2 things. One, the one thing I do hear, I hear sentiment on that to hold the vote. From the other Arab communities that are against that says that's the most selfish thing. It's easy to say that from your comfort of your home. Because understand this, to hold your vote and wait for another 4 years under a dictatorship, that's never going to happen. If the man wins, there is no 26. That means more Gazans will die, more Lebanese will die, more Iranians will die. It's going to be a war. That's a selfish put because you don't have an answer. It's about doing the work. And some of that same protester, I ask those protesters. So I understand you're protesting at the Democratic Party. I never see you at the Trump rally where I'm out there protesting. I never see them at a Trump rally. So I always pose that question: why are you not going to the Trump rallies? Who can?
What do they say?
No. Well, we're here. I said, why are you not at the Trump rally? I'm going to the Trump rally. We're protesting right now. We're going to that rally. Come with us. They never show up. And so the thing is that right now you got there's a lot of people on the ground that are organizing with the Palestinian community in Dearborn. They're doing the work. They're working with Rashida out there. They're doing the work. Michigan United is one of those groups. They're on the ground doing the work, talking to those folks, understanding you don't like the policy now. She's the sitting vice president. She cannot undermine the president. she has a policy on that. And so those things are happening right now. They're doing back on the back end, but they're doing the work. They're going on the doors to doors. That is happening right now. Like I said, Detroit outreach right now, and the ballots are coming back in. The excitement's going in is over 65,000 as of this morning. We're probably going to hear about 80,000 probably by the end of this week. And I'll be surprised. I think we'll get 100,000 probably by the time of early voting ends. And that's what's going to be happening with the absentee ballot voting right now. The folks are doing the work. It's not being publicized. We're just listening to the loud echo chambers here and there. And sometimes I think the news is looking for those echo chambers and not going out and really talking to people on the ground.
Yeah, and let me ask you this, Reverend Yearwood, because young people, they were the ones on these college campuses last semester who were shutting these schools down, who were sitting in. Many got arrested. Many weren't able to graduate. So we know how passionate the issue of this war, how passionate young people have been about it. And I met a young man in Tempe on my tour who said he was voting for Jill Stein. And he said it was solely because of the war. He called Joe Biden Genocide Joe. He said Kamala Harris, of course, was as complicit in the decisions of Joe Biden. And, they have this theory that she's in the room, that she should have some influence. You can't tell them what Norman and Michael just said about the role of the vice president and how the vice president doesn't have the authority to override anything the president says. They don't want to hear that. But what are you hearing with young people who have been out on the front lines, like I said, on these college campuses, and now they've got to make a decision?
So the first thing is that, people should recognize that for young people, their voices are valid for wanting genocide anywhere not to happen. In the Congo, in Haiti, in Palestine. That's a good thing. We don't want a generation of young people who actually don't want or don't grieve when they see an injustice. The thing with that, though, I think, which is so important, is the fact of the matter that we also need young people to understand how democracy works and how politics works. And so you mentioned it quite well, and the other guest mentioned it. It's about access. And so if you have an administration and their cabinet, their Department of Defense, their Secretary of State, those who work overseas, and you don't have access to those policies or to those jobs or even to be in those arenas, then that's one of the key things here. I think people misunderstand that the federal government is not just for one person. People thought it was with Joe Biden. Now it's with Kamala Harris. It's literally all these agencies that have an impact. And for us, we want young people to understand how important it is to understand the Department of Agriculture, who just ensured that Black farmers were able to be repaid for the injustice they received for many years, or the Department of Interior that is led by an indigenous woman who is ensuring that the land that was taken from many of those communities can be given back or can be shared in a way that is honorable to those communities. Or the Environmental Protection Agency, which is run by a Black man who went to an HBCU, Michael Regan, who's ensuring initiatives like Justice 40, meaning that 40% of the things that are paid must also go to vulnerable communities. I can go on. The Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation, which has a huge impact for hip hop. Those highways that were built through our community that literally created hip hop in the beginning from the Bronx Causeway, making sure, looking at the pollution, looking at the redlining, you have to have people in these positions. So I agree. The Black man who runs the Department of Defense is an important entity, so that we have access to those conversations. But if we're just yelling from the outside and don't have an inside-outside strategy, not understanding how legislation actually works, we're doing a disservice to our community. So I do think that this election has shown that we have a long way to go as far as educating our community and ensuring a political education process starts literally the day after this election. That we have to get back to educating our community about what the federal government, how it works, the state government, the local government, why the city council is critical, why the judges you're voting for are important. I mean, all these things are critical because we can't be just outside complaining and not actually changing policy.
Yeah, I talk a lot on my tour about the Department of Justice as a civil rights lawyer, really trying to make young people understand that all that they were in those streets protesting about after George Floyd, after Trayvon Martin, after Breonna Taylor, all of that goes away because Trump, under the one Trump administration, he pretty much eviscerated the civil rights division of the Department of Justice, and he's pretty much promised to do away with it, the Department of Justice altogether, except to use it to prosecute his enemies. The Department of Justice, as we know it, will probably no longer exist. He talks about giving police officers immunity. These are terms that people don't think a whole lot about. But if you care about police brutality, if you care about holding police accountable, you have to care about the Department of Justice and those judges that we know right now. So much of what we're fighting for, trying to maintain our rights, is because we allowed Donald Trump to win in 2016, and he got an opportunity to use the seat of power to put people in place in federal judgeships that have tenure for life, that will be there for years and years to come, who interpret the law. So there's the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, and the importance of understanding that. So yes, kudos and bravo to all of us who are going to lead, hopefully, this charge about re-educating folks, because so many people don't have a clue about how our federal government works, and they blame Kamala Harris for things she has absolutely positively nothing to do with. We're going to talk about Donald Trump, what he's been telling voters about the power of the presidents and how he's been distorting that power and people buying into it. And I think that has something to do with people who somehow believe that Kamala Harris has way more power than any president has under our Constitution. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580. There's a new article out in the New York Times. John Kelly, who was the longest serving chief of staff for Donald Trump when he was president, who has been at times reluctant to criticize the president, sat down for 3 recorded interviews with the New York Times. And in those interviews, he said, more than policies, people should examine the fitness and character of who they are voting for. He went on to say that Donald Trump met the definition of a fascist. He said, if elected, he would govern like a dictator. He said Trump had no understanding of the Constitution or the concept of the rule of law. He confirmed previous reports that Trump had made admiring statements about Hitler, had expressed contempt for disabled vets, and had characterized those who died on the battlefield for the U.S. as losers and suckers. These were comments first reported by The Atlantic. So when you hear someone like John Kelly, a decorated Marine who was a secretary in the Homeland Security Department before going over to be the chief of staff, probably someone who spent more time with Donald Trump in the White House than any other person that worked with him, why isn't that enough, in your opinion, Norman, to change the minds of not just those few Democrats that may vote for Donald Trump, but even those Republicans? This is a white man, older, revered military man, saying, I was there. I was in the room. I heard this man call the veterans that Republicans say they revere, suckers and losers.
It goes back to those folks are comfortable with classism, racism. It's about those who don't want to deal with the new reality of this world where we're vastly going to be from the minority to majority. You're not longer competing with just Black Americans, competing with Asian Americans, competing with Americans from all over the world, and you have to compete. So the days of you just being a standard white man who just graduate from high school with 2.0 to tell a bunch of folks who don't look like you what to do are over. And those folks can't deal with that. That's when they want to say make America great again, because they want to go back to those days where they had superiority rule. Even though they're not the global majority, they feel some type of minority pseudo, places. They want to go back to those days. That's what the reality is, unfortunately. And to our brothers and sisters who are on that side, unfortunately, we got those that want to be the only Negro in the room, that want to play overseer or gatekeeper on that side because they feel that they can advance with that. But again, it never lasts long. You look at those from Omarosa to others who are a part of Herman Cain, who are on that board, and it never ends well.
No, absolutely. Michael, John Kelly went on to say that Trump can never accept the fact that he wasn't the most powerful man in the world. And by power, he says, I mean an ability to do anything he wanted. Donald Trump is telling folks that Kamala Harris is, he calls it whining about the bipartisan immigration bill failing. He says, why does she talk about a bill? She doesn't need a bill. When you're the president, you have executive power. You can do whatever you want to do. So some of these voters have bought into this notion that presidents can do whatever they want to do because that's how he feels about the office.
Well, if he could do whatever he wants to do, why didn't he get the wall built that he said Mexico was going to pay for? If he can do whatever he wanted to do, why didn't he deport 11 million undocumented immigrants when he was president? He didn't do that then. So there are secret powers that, and there have been articles written recently about secret powers that presidents have. But if you, with Project 2025, this 922-page agenda, what it is going to do is federalize a lot of policies that have been put in place at the local level, and is going to give more power to the president. We just saw the Supreme Court make a move and empower the courts, and also with the overturn the Chevron decision, but also in a ruling that a president is basically immune from prosecution if they are carrying out their duties. Okay, if they are carrying out their presidential duties. Now, it can be a great line between presidential duties and non-presidential duties.
Michael, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. I need you to hold that thought. Anybody wants to hear what Michael has to say on this topic, join us tomorrow night, Wednesday. We're in Detroit, Michigan. We're going to be at the In Harmony Cafe on Dexter Avenue. You can go to my website, arevamartin.com, and sign up to join us. We're going to continue this conversation. We're inviting all of Detroit out because these are critical issues and critical topics, and we want to make sure people have good information as they are going to the polls. Thank you so much to all of my panelists for joining me. What an insightful conversation. Stick around. There's more to come on KBLA Talk 1580 when we come forward.